Hello and welcome to the 99 Yards Draft Talk podcast, where currently we are working our way through our positional rankings for the 2023 NFL Draft. Today we're moving on and we are talking about the offensive tackles, which has us all excited. We are your trio of draft experts for 99 Yards. I'm OWAIN. I'm joined by Stu and MJ. Give our lovely audience a wave, guys. There's a really good opportunity to say that we're also available on YouTube for your best viewing experience. But guys, as I said, we are previewing the 2023 offensive tackle prospects. Let's jump straight into it. Stu, I know this is your favourite position to scout, so come on, give us your overview of this class.
I'm going to say round one potential, very good. I think at the top end of the offensive tackles, there is probably about 7 names that you could think of that could be going in that top 50, I would say 7 to 8 names really. So yeah, it's a very good year if you want to get a good offensive tackle, and there's a good mix of skill sets, a good mix of potential right and left tackles as well, depending on what you want to go for. I think that once we get a run on tackles will start coming off the boards quickly. And I think just that bottom of the top 10, just outside the top 10, is where we're going to start seeing a run on tackles. And I think there's some very good ones here as well.
Yep, I'd agree with that. This is obviously Stu's wheelhouse. We've been talking about offensive linemen, and we're on to tackles. And I think if you want one, you've got to get in early. I think if this is what you want, as you said there, Stu, you're looking at around about a run starting at 10. I think you need, if you desperately need one, you'd better pick one on the first day. And some people are going to have to move up to get them as well. Because I think as soon as we get past probably the first, we'll talk about, 5, 6, 7 here. Once you get past that, I think we do start to get into a bit of slim pickings for this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a position really, isn't it, that traditionally you do have to take early if you're going to get an impact starter. There's not a great list of hit rates going in later rounds. If you want a good one, you usually have to take him on day one and early at that. We'll get on with our top 5s then. So we've done all the scouting on these offensive tackles, and we'll go around the room letting you know who we have ranked as the best tackles in the 2023 NFL Draft. We'll start at 5 and we'll work our way to 1 who is our best and our top offensive tackle. We'll then focus on some of the other guys, people who missed out, potential later round picks, and some exciting players later on afterwards. But MJ, why don't you kick us off with the top 5s? Who do you have at number 5?
Okay, so the 5th position was actually probably the most difficult for me. I think the first 4 dropped out quite naturally for me looking at those. And in the end, the 5th one was one where I just went back to him and I just liked what I saw on the tape, and it was Matthew BERGERON from Syracuse.
Correct.
2 points. So with tackles, I like to watch somebody where for the most part he looks under control. Everything looks under control. He fires out of his stance well. He's got good balance. He's a solid guy. He knows his role well. We're up past 2,500 snaps, something like that. And obviously, being on the offensive line of Syracuse, you're going to get some work as well, because they're not one of those blue chip teams at the moment. So I think everything is there for him. I think there's still some work he could possibly do in his run blocking, and I think he's got better, but he got flagged quite a lot early on in his career for holding. I think he got a bit bear huggy, which he's worked on. But ultimately, when I was looking against some of the other, there was probably 2 or 3 other guys I was looking at. He looked as solid and under control as anybody. And for me, there was an element of safety around picking him. So that's why he came in at number 5.
I'm going to get sacked. He doesn't make my top 5. And I know that's going to kill Owain. Yeah, he's not even looking at me, not even commenting. For me, he was just outside that top 5. He would have been my 6th player. He's a super experienced tackle, that 2,500 snaps range. I think he's a good athlete, but I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he has really good burst off the line. He fires it. He's got a really strong point of attack. He uses his quickness and flexibility. He's a real solid player, and I think that he will do a great job for anyone who wants to pick him. He's a really intelligent player. He reacts very well. But for me, I think he maybe just stalled. I was really high on him over the summer. I think he didn't have the same progression as I was hoping that he would have. I think we talked about it in the O-line kind of one. I think he's one of these guys who the interior guys are one of these guys who's a waist bender rather than a hip bender, and that he's often kind of dipping his head a little bit forward, which is a habit that you might need to look into. And then at other times you can often get a little bit high when he sets back, which allows people to get underneath and lose a little bit of power. But I think he's a really solid prospect. I think he's going to do very well at the next level, but he's just outside that top 5 for me.
Yep, so he is number 5 for me, and I really, really like Matthew Bergeron. I've spoken about him so much. Even over the summer, I had him ranked really highly. He's just so polished. He's solid. He's dependable. Just as a prospect, he has a lot of what you're looking for in an offensive tackle. He may not have the kind of elite physical traits that some of these guys at the top have, but he just has... There's something to be said of just being a good football player, right? And that is what Matthew Bergeron is. He's got his size is more than good enough. In the run game, I think he's a driver and he goes searching for work, which is always good on the outside. He's quick as well, moving across the line and up to the second level. Footwork is active, really physical, extremely polished, reads the game really well, very intelligent. You can see him, he can read pre-snap and pick up the coverages really well, and he can work his way through traffic as well when he's a run blocker. Athleticism is more than good enough. I think when you just go down the list, he just checks all the boxes. Everything he has, I think, is more than good enough to be successful at the next level. The reason why he's at number 5, I think he struggles a little bit more against speed. He gets caught chasing maybe around the back end a little bit too often. And while he isn't the most powerful, what he does have, I think he uses extremely well. But when he is beaten, he doesn't have an abundance of counter moves, which I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of. But if you want a solid input starter, I don't think you're going to go far wrong selecting Matthew Bergeron. Stu, 5.
Yeah, so for me is number 5 is Anton Harrison, the tackle from Oklahoma. He's a player that I really liked. I think quietly he is one of the better tackles that are available this year. There's not a lot of people talk about Anton Harrison very much when you hear about other prospects. I think he's quietly just done a really good job. He's a bit leaner than some of these other tackles, but he's got ideal height. He's got that long, athletic kind of build. He's kind of well proportioned in that, however. And I think that if he needs to, he could add a bit more to his frame. He's very athletic. He follows and mirrors very well. He's got good speed. He can keep up with pass rushes around the outside. And he's also quick enough to get out in the run game. He's got good range there. He changes very quick in his directions. He's got nice loose hips as well. He allows to bend and move. He's very well balanced. He's quite patient, and he very rarely is caught being over aggressive. He's a very, very good pass protector, and I think that's where his game is as well. He understands angles and how to nullify those pass rushing lanes, and he's got very good hand placement as well. He does tend to get beat a little bit on the inside for me, and you can often give up that shoulder on the inside a little bit, and maybe is a little bit upright as well. Sometimes people can get in underneath him. He's maybe not the strongest for me, and I think he lacks a little bit of a mean streak, which he maybe needs to develop as well. But pass protection, I think he's very, very good. And if you're a pass-heavy offense, I think that you could go wrong in Anton Harrison. I don't think you'll go as wrong as you might do with some of these other guys.
Yeah, he doesn't appear for me. He would have been outside. I'm not entirely sure. Roughly, I'm not saying he would have been 6, but he would have been there and thereabouts. The thing I found interesting about him was I wondered why he was coming out in one aspect. I wondered why he didn't stay in for another year. To do exactly what you said, Stu, to kind of develop. I've got written down here, develop strength. He can't necessarily move people, get a bit more oomph, get a bit more solid. He's definitely a finesse guy. I also noted there's quite a few penalties that he's racked up in the last couple of years as well. So I think that he's a decent prospect, and I think all the traits are there. I just wonder whether actually he might have been better served staying in college football for another year or not. But we'll see. But you're right. I've seen a lot of chatter in the last 2 to 3 weeks actually about him starting to come back up boards. And I don't know whether some of it has he just been sort of ignored a little bit because he's been at Oklahoma. I mean, their slate of fixtures wasn't exactly the sexiest slate of fixtures. He hasn't had an awful lot to kind of go up against there in terms of real top class opposition. But a good player. I just have a few question marks.
Yeah, I don't have him ranked either, and he's a guy I think that relies maybe too much on his athleticism to win, and that goes for both guys at Oklahoma, because the guy on the right hand side, who's Wanya Morris, also is kind of that athletic player that you're going to need to develop. Now, Anton Harrison is miles better than Wanya Morris, but he is going to need some development, especially in his power and his strength profile. But if anyone can do it, it'll be an NFL coach once you get him in the weight room and you start getting him with, all the proper nutritionists, and you start adding some weight to him, then that might help. So he's a guy that I think you're betting on being better later on down the road. So this is a kind of like the classic, do you take the guy who's almost instantly ready now, who I would say would be Matthew Bergeron, or the guy who could potentially be better a few years down the line, who that might be Anton Harrison. So I think it's just that age-old question, what do you want? But yeah, I think there's a lot there to like about Anton Harrison, and maybe he is going a little bit underrated. Maybe you're right there, Stu.
Yeah. I wonder whether you could be quite clever here, couldn't you, as an NFL team, in terms of draft capital to get him, it might take less this year than next year. If he does improve, if he had stayed in and improved, maybe he's solidly a round one prospect going up, top sort of 15 pick. Maybe this year you pick him up a little bit lower down a board and actually have got yourself a really good value pick.
How high do you think you could go, Stu?
Anton Harrison.
Yeah.
I think his ceiling starts with Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I was going to say 19-20.
19. Yeah, I think they're on the lookout for a left tackle. They're not going to get some of the guys we're going to speak about later on. But I wouldn't be surprised if he went there or thereabouts. I think that's where his run probably starts. But I can see him comfortably going in the first round.
MJ, do you want to give us your number 4?
Okay, so number 4 for me is Darnell Wright from Tennessee. He's played at both left and right tackle, but seems to have settled now at right tackle. He is definitely in the category of big, strong tackle. He is an anchor. If he gets his hands on you, then that's that done. There's some really good, again, if you want to watch some footage, there's some really good footage of him against Will Anderson, and there's a good comparison. Our top edge rusher against Darnell Wright. And that is, and I've said it before on this podcast, that Darnell Wright is battle tested. Out of all of the tackles we'll talk about, I think he's right up there in terms of having played against the best of the best coming out of college level. The other thing is because he absorbs pressure, and he is good at sustaining, and it is that anchor, and he can even get away with his hands not being placed correctly, because even if they do start to lift him up, he's just so solid you can't actually get him out of the way. So I think, and particularly in the run game, that power translates in the run game. So if you are running off that right side, he is going to clear you a path. So he's also cleaned up his penalties. He went from 10 penalties the year before down to 3. So he's worked hard on that. So the reason he's at 4 is because he's most definitely a right tackle. And my top 3 are all left tackles, which I would say, positional value wise, you're looking at left tackle over right tackle. But if that was the position you needed, then Darnell Wright's your man.
Sorry, I was just being polite.
What's that face for?
I was just letting you be polite and talk about Darnell, right?
Oh, well, I have him at 4 as well. And I think this is the way this might end up going, unless the poke face is back out, Stu. The absolute Darnell Wright, man mountain, hits all the size measurables and then some. Plays with pure power, surprising athleticism for his size, explosive and quite bouncy out of his stance, but has the balance and the anchor to maintain his blocks. Really solid right tackle who is going to get some top 20 hype. I think you're going to see him climb up. That I would say it might be difficult for the Steelers, depending on how the board falls, difficult for a team like the Steelers to end up passing on him, or even the Commanders even beforehand. I think he can get a little bit overzealous in the run game, that he can kind of dive into his blocks instead of just being rock solid, and his footwork can be a little bit clunky at times. And there are definitely plays where he is far too grippy and targets the chest. And maybe that's something you really like about him, that he's just aggressive and violent, and he goes after you rather than, especially in pass protection, he wants to hit you first rather than wait for you to come and counter. But it maybe does lead to some penalty-worthy plays and him sacrificing leverage too much at times. But he's a player who, say, at number 4, he's right at the top of this class. And a player who I think probably is going to go top 20.
Yeah, Darnell Wright is someone who, as you say, I described him as an inverse pass rusher, in that he goes the guy who goes after the pass rusher rather than the opposite way around. He's someone who will shift defensive linemen with ease, opening up running lanes for his running back. He's got very strong hands and he's battle tested. He's got the right size for the position. For me, he's not the most flexible tackle. He tends to outpower rather than use leverage against his opponents. And my problem with Darnell Wright is in passing downs. I think once the ball snapped, he sets his anchor. He doesn't often drop deep into that passing set, which allows people to kind of maneuver around him. I think he struggles a little bit when he gets kind of downfield. Once he's moved defensive, he can move defensive linemen quite well. When he's going out trying to take out linebackers and nickel corners and all this kind of thing, I think he does struggle to adjust. And I think his trouble is he struggles really with speed rushers. And I think if you have a clever offensive coordinator, you're going to put your speediest guy outside around Darnell Wright and just run around him, because I think he struggles to match that high end speed. But a rock solid tackle prospect, but he didn't make my top 5.
Okay. Who's the number 4 that did them?
And this guy screams traits all day. It's DaJuan Jones, the offensive tackle from Ohio State. He is an absolute monster of a guy. 6'8", that 370 odd pounds, close to 100th percentile in all measurements. He's got an enormous wingspan. He's a guy who's played at right tackle as well, and this is a projection, and this is a player that I'm probably taking a bit of a flyer on. I think you guys maybe are not going to. He moves really well for a guy his size. He's got decent movement skills, and he's a run get. He will absolutely obliterate people who are in front of him. He just completely knocks him out. He's got very good grip strength. He's got big, strong hands. He can understand counters very well. He uses his length extremely well, so he's creating that long rushing rain round for pass rushers. He's actually a really good pass protector. I think people think of DaJuan Jones is just this absolute mutant who's going to just smash people out of the way. But he squares up to people really nicely. He understands his angles, and he's quite patient in pass protection. He doesn't overcommit. I think that there is work to do there. He's maybe not the most agile of guys in the world, but at that size, he's got plenty of measurables. I think coaches are going to love that. He's just this huge guy who has a lot of skills and has played for a good team. I think he's probably going to go higher than people might expect him to go. I wouldn't be surprised if a team takes a flyer on a guy like DaJuan Jones. We've seen guys like Mekhi Becton had flyers taking them on higher, and I would rate him in that kind of category. To be honest, I probably like DeJuan Jones a bit better than like Mekhi Becton coming out as well. So for me, he was tackle number 4.
Okay, so yeah, obviously he doesn't make my 5. He was in consideration. I think that the thing I like about him is he understands who he is and he understands his game. He understands he is, obviously one of the biggest tackles to come out of this class, both in terms of things like arm length and just sheer size and strength. And he is another absolute mountain. I think that the problem I have with him is momentum is his friend and his enemy. So it is his friend, in terms of if he gets it all right, then obviously he's going to flatten whoever he's got, or they're not going to get past him. It's going to affect his ability to recover. At 374 pounds, which is what he weighed in at the combine. That is just massive. And if you get it wrong at the speed that these guys are going at, you just can't recover. And I think you mentioned Mekhi Becton there. I think the other thing is, and we've been a little bit burned here with Becton. Obviously, Becton's had real problems in terms of staying on the field, which is why I kind of had a little bit of a limit in terms of that weight range. And as soon as we hit 330, which was Darnell Wright, that was kind of my ceiling. And I just decided, the same as with Becton, 374 started to ring some alarm bells in terms of, is he going to have that durability? Is he going to be able to stay on the field? Some teams won't mind that. Some teams will. This is the thing, we never know. Teams have thresholds around all sorts of things. We'll talk about arm length later on. We're bound, that's bound to come up. Things like arm length, things like weight. Teams will have their thresholds. Somebody will like DeJuan Jones, and yeah, he will go. I don't know whether it's first round, but early day 2, he won't hang around much longer than that.
Yeah, for me with DeJuan Jones, his size is both his greatest strength and for me his biggest weakness, where his size means he's just so big that you just can't get round him. And then he has his size and his bulk just give him a insane strength profile, which means he can absolutely bully you. But at the same time, the weight is so much that I feel like he can struggle to transfer it at times from transferring it from his lower half to his upper half, that it means he can get quite lungy sometimes as well, almost diving in and lunging into his sets. And that means that his power profile can be a little bit off because he's almost trying to recover the transition of his weight back into his stance, which obviously means by the time he's recovered to do that speedier rushes are already around him. He would have been number 6 for me. So I did like DeJuan Jones, but not enough to have him at 5. I think again, the concerns over whether he can stay on the field are difficult to measure, but they're definitely there. But he has been very good at Ohio State, and if he can kind of rein in some of his tendencies, then I think there's a really good right tackle there, because he will just be a right tackle.
You asked me the last one about where does Anton Harrison go. I think there's only one team really that I think will really want DeJuan Jones that I can think of, and that's New England. I think he would be someone who, they've had that huge, massive guys like Trent Brown and things on the offensive line. I would be surprised if there's a bit of interest there. I think he probably will be an early day 2 guy as opposed to day 1, and I think I'm probably higher on him than a lot of people are as well. So I'm fairly realistic in where I think that he might go.
I quite like him in some of those later on spots. Maybe for me, starting with the Bills, I think I mentioned that on a previous pod, and where we're answering questions, I think they could use him at right tackle. And then you get into, does a team like the Eagles want to have him as Lane Johnson's replacement? And then we don't quite know what the Chiefs are doing, moving that line about. So could they potentially be in play for a right tackle as well? So there's every chance that a player like DeJuan Jones goes later on in the first round. I'm totally with you there. MJ, should we come to you at number 3?
Okay, so number 3 for me is Broderick Jones from Georgia. And this is a guy where it's a little bit more raw. He hasn't played quite as much. We're only at just over 1,000 snaps in the last 2 years for him. He is a bit of a bully boy. He likes to move people, and he likes to be aggressive, and he is going to come out to meet you. He's also very athletic. I think he was ranked second among the tackles from the combine. And he does like, with his hands, he does like to get in there and punch and try and move and use that power. But he is still learning the position, and that shows up at different points. And whether that's his hands, whether that's him particularly learning his angles, and also it's fine to be aggressive, but again, a little bit like we keep coming back to this thing of your strength taken to the extreme can become your weakness, and that can move him out of position if you become over aggressive. So I think some of it with Broderick Jones is projection. But I did like what I saw, and I had him coming in as number 3.
I think this is where we're going to get a consensus. I think everyone's going to have Broderick Jones as number 3, and I think he's been long slated as that number 3 for quite a while throughout the draft process as well. He's a younger guy. As MG said, he's maybe not the most experienced at the position, but I think he's right in coming out now. I don't think that another year in college is going to hugely improve his draft stock, if I'm honest. I think he's young enough that, yeah, let's get on that NFL projection now whilst he's still hot. He's an agile mover for someone at his size. In the run game, he flies off that line of scrimmage. He gets the second level well. He's really fast for a tackle. I think he played basketball when he was younger as well, and that kind of movement skill showed. He's got really good spatial awareness, core strength. He can match pass rushers as well. I think he will be a left tackle. I think he's got all the ability in the world to play there. If some team picks him up, they might start him on the right side if they've got someone there and move him over. As sometimes we see with these younger guys, there's maybe less pressure as such playing on the right side. But his technique is maybe not the most polished, but again, that's something he's going to let. He's only had 20 odd starts at the college level. Didn't allow a sack at all last year, which is pretty impressive. Lots to like about Broderick Jones's game. He's going to be right up in there in that tackle run.
Yeah, you guessed it. He's number 3 for me as well. I guess just building on what you've said there, that he's raw, but he has really good size and he's got really good traits to work with. And while he's projection, there's a lot of promise here to work with in terms of physical in the run game. Extremely athletic, had a really good combine, but he has got good speed and movement skills, and that isn't just long speed, that's short area quickness that I think you're quite happy leaving him on an island out there at left tackle. His movement both laterally and vertically, and he can move to the second level in the run game, and he's quite happy to maul you, and he will absolutely finish, no problem at all. Most of the time his hand placement is grippy, especially when he can hit the centre of the chest. I think once he does that, that's him. That's a win, and it's a yes, let's move on to the next rep. But because he is extremely raw, I found him to be quite loose at times, if that's the right word, where he needed to just have a little bit more bend in his knees and a little bit more sturdy, especially on passing snaps, which would have improved his balance, where he can get caught blocking a little bit too high, giving the leverage away. So I just like him to work on that, work on the anchor, work on his sets, but there's a lot here to work with, and he's still a really young prospect. Stu, do you want to go to number 2? There's every chance here that we think we're going to have the top 3 guys. Do we all have them in the same order? That's what we're going to find out.
We're going to find out pretty soon, aren't we? Number 2 for me is a guy that me and Owen had the pleasure of seeing when we played in Dublin at the college game there, and that's Northwestern's Peter Skoronski. He is someone there's been a lot of talk about for a while. He's a guy who's got a NFL pedigree, with his grandfather was in the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame. He's a really smart guy with great football IQ. when you look at him, he doesn't look the most physically imposing guy in the world at the tagging, but he's someone who has lots of other traits that are very, very good. He's lightning quick off the snap, whether that is moving in his passing or his running sets. He is quick across the ground. He moves pretty well, nice and easy for a guy his size. He's got really good quick feet, particularly when kind of matching up with pass rushers. Capable enough in the run game as well. The things that we're going to talk about, and I think has been talked about to death, is he a tackle or is he a guard? I think that he has more than enough about him to play at tackle position, but he has position flexibility as well. He is maybe not as strong as some of these other guys, and is maybe not quite as nasty as some of the other guys as well. But he's a rock solid, not a spectacular player. He's got all the technical aspects you want from an offensive lineman. He's probably the most refined with his understanding of the game, how to place his hands, how to move in space, understand leverage, understand angles. He is going to go early in this draft. I think teams are going to love him. Not every single team, because there is that question about the thresholds. But for me, it was a very, very close 1 and 2.
Okay, do you want me to blow the consensus out of the water now? I've got number 1.
Let's save it because I've. All right, okay, go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I ended up putting him at number 1, and this was, I was going back and forth with this and the other guy who we'll talk about, and in the end, I looked at it and I was like, I don't care how long the arms are, because at the end of those arms are hands that know exactly what they're doing. And I think he has that 3 years worth of experience. So again, we're talking well over 2,000 snaps at left tackle. It is not easy to be a tackle in the Big Ten. He's played against, here goes another, I haven't done too many this time, but here's another stat. So 40% of the top 20 defenses last season he's played against. He is absolutely everything that you said there. Wonderful technician. He's not dominant, but he's got all of the things that you need for your tackle to have. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's a lovely mover. He's got quick feet. He actually tested really well at the combine. I think he came out a little bit more athletic than some people perhaps were thinking. Great consistency, great balance. As I say, he's technically very good with his hands. He's not particularly dominant. He's not overly powerful. But when I looked at him against the other guy who we'll talk about, I was just like, I'm going to go with the experience and I'm going to go with the technician.
MJ, you disappoint me, because we were so close there to call him bingo, where I think that's the closest we've been to a full house on any of the positional prospects so far, because I've got Peter Skoronski at number 2.
So close.
It was so close yet so far. I think that's probably the closest we're going to be at all. But there we go. Skoronski, a player that I think has all of the fundamentals, awesome in pass protection. Hand placement is one of his best traits. I would say that it's extremely strong. His placement is key. His anchor is strong as well. He can recover when he needs to. Very rarely, I'm not sure I saw him on the floor at all, which is always a good trait. Holds up in run blocking. Oh, yes, he isn't a nasty finisher, but he more than does the job. Quick footwork, just extremely polished, and that's where he is. He's more polished than nasty, which isn't necessarily a bad trait to have. He's a little smaller than these guys. I mean, his size is not a problem at all, but you know, when we're talking about some of the guys, he's weighed in at 313, which isn't a bad weight, but it is slightly lighter than some of the other guys that we're talking about. And maybe, would you like to see more physicality? I don't know, maybe in the run blocking a little bit, but I wouldn't want to take away from how polished he is. But yeah, he's one of those players who has all the fundamentals and is a solid player and will be an NFL left tackle for years to come, I'm sure of it. And if that doesn't work out, you are able to kick him into guard, which goes through a couple of these guys as well. That I'm sure he can play left tackle, but I like the ability to change him about. And he was recruited as a centre, remember. So if you really wanted to, then you could do that. If you do have question marks, then you can answer them in different ways. So he's a player that allows you to get your best 5 offensive linemen on the field, which will be coveted. The question, I guess, is, with his grandfather being in the Packers Hall of Fame, does that mean we have to rule him out to 9 to the Bears? Because we all have him go in for offensive tackle. Does that take that out of the question?
No. I think if the Bears want him, they'll take him.
Yeah.
And he's a guy, obviously I think he was born in Chicago as well, and he's went to Northwestern. He's someone who's been around the area as well. Are they going to take him? They might do, and I think that is a real option for them on the board, because they just need to get good at all positions. Maybe not left. Again, is that just a one-off year at left tackle for a late round flyer? Who knows? Peter Skoronski will imminently upgrade the Bears' offensive line wherever you want and decide to play him. That's if he goes there.
Do you want to keep talking, Stu? Do you want to let us know who I believe will be both of our number 1s and MG's number 2?
I'm hoping so. So it's Paris Johnson, and it's not often me and OWAIN come to an agreement on these kind of things. So for me, Paris Johnson, the tackle from Ohio State, is the number 1. He's only had 1 year playing that tackle. He plays a full year at right guard before switching over to left tackle. So again, he's shown the ability to do that with ease. He protected CJ Stroud incredibly well this year on that left-hand side. He's someone who is big, athletic, he's competitive. He has the right size and length for the position. He's a real true competitor. He does have a little bit of that nastiness about him in the run game as well. He's a powerhouse in that game. He's obviously learned from that, playing in the guard position as well. He can deal with linebackers when he's on the move as well. He understands how to run block. He also is a very good pass protector as well. He's got the right dimensions for that. He does need a little bit of refinement, as I say. He's only had that 1 year at the position. But I think another thing that's impressed about me, just kind of reading about Paris Johnson, is he's got that character about him as well. I mean, there's not many guys his age have set up their own foundation, which he has. Was set up whilst he was in high school, to obtain resources for disabled veterans and student athletes. He's also a very clever guy. He can speak a couple of languages, which I find quite interesting looking at him as well. He apparently speaks quite fluent in Mandarin, which you wouldn't expect for them. But again, not talking about languages, we're talking about his football play. He's someone who I think has all the ability, all the traits in the world to become a real top left tackle. We had a few tackles come out last year that were really highly regarded. And went early. We had the likes of Evan Neal, Ekemakwanu, Charles Cross. I think Johnson matches up reasonably well with all those kind of guys, and he would be in that conversation. We saw how well particularly Cross did last year. Different type of tackle, but for me, Paris Johnson, I think, deserves to go nice and early in this draft.
Yeah, I guess with him, before going and speaking about his pros and cons, want to mention that, having played right tackle, then right guard, then transitioning to left tackle, just that isn't easy to do. We've had Mike Wall on, the long-time NFL offensive lineman, interior guy, on the 99 Yards podcast a few times, and this question that we've posed to him a few times is, how difficult is it to go from left tackle to right tackle? And he said that it's quite difficult, because you're mirroring. So what your footwork does on the left hand side is almost the opposite of what you need to do on the right hand side. So to be able to do that with the ease that he does, shows extremely good intelligence and really good athletic ability, which is extremely impressive. His hands are just super grippy in terms of his strengths. Rarely do you see him get beaten. They're strong, they're speedy, sharp, and I think that's kind of his biggest strength is his hand usage. He's physical in the run game. He can open up lanes when he needs to. Obviously, we saw that with him playing at guard as well. Has a really good base anchor, and he's able to drive forward, never really loses leverage. I think this season he's just answered all the questions that he needs to. So it was almost, you've been playing right guard, but we know you're going to be a tackle. Go out there and show us why. And that's exactly what he's done in this past 2022 season. So I think that he's deserving of going nice and early as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So he comes in at number 2, and I think just coming back to what you said about consensus, Owain, this just shows everybody who's listening or watching, we don't talk about these things before we come on. We keep our cards very close to our chest, and it really helps the discussion, doesn't it? The thing, so Paris Johnson comes in at number 2, not a million miles behind Peter Skoronski by any stretch of the imagination, but a completely different sort of journey to get here. So you have Skoronski, who's done 3 years at left tackle, and you get Paris Johnson, who's just moved in the last season and done 1 season at left tackle, and as you say, done very well. I'd like to see him on the dance floor because I really like his footwork. I think he can probably cut some pretty good shapes on the dance floor. He comes in at number 2 because of that slight lack of experience. So there is some refinement that needs to happen. There is a little bit of, obviously he's 6'6", so the downside there is it's very easy to get a bit high when you're trying to block and get lifted up a little bit. And his hands, he can end up a little bit in a bear hug when he's doing pass protect. What actually helps him out is the footwork. He can often correct using his footwork to anything that else that's kind of gone awry in a particular play. He is going to go early. He's got all the right measurables. In terms of like Frankenstein's monster, could we put Peter Skoronski's hands on Paris Johnson's arms at 36 and 1/8 length? That would make him ideal. But all of the measurables are there. All of the traits are there. If he's that high an IQ guy, if he's learning Mandarin, playbook's going to be fine, isn't it? You're not going to have a problem. And as you say, he's got experience on 2 very different positions on an offensive line, so he is going to be able to whatever you ask him to do, he's going to do it, isn't he? He's going to know what he's doing. He's going to know the scheme, and he will go very early. And I think as soon as Skoronski and Johnson start going, if it is around that 10 plus or minus 2, it's going to start an avalanche of tackles, isn't it? We're going to see 3-4 tackles go pretty quickly on day 1, and Johnson will be in amongst those.
I know we always talk about mock drafts being a conversation point, and I haven't published it yet, but I've been playing about with a mock draft that on the premise that the Colts will deal for Lamar Jackson after the draft, and I've put Paris Johnson going number 4.
Wow.
As they do have a need at left tackle, and I would feel very comfortable with Paris Johnson going at number 4 to the Colts in that scenario.
Yeah, and I was going to say that it wouldn't surprise me if there's a team that starts to panic, who's maybe later up in the teens, that sees maybe Skoronski and Paris Johnson go and goes, there's not going to be much left here for me. I need to go and get a guy because that's my glaring need, and I need to go and fill it. So it wouldn't surprise me if maybe we see a trade up for one of these top maybe 3 or 4 guys.
It's that thing, isn't it, where teams are all too aware that look, this is the position group where if you get the right one, you're set for however many years. 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you are absolutely set, especially at left tackle. And if you either have your franchise quarterback or you want to get your tackle in and then slot the quarterback in afterwards, it's right up there as one of the positions that you need to get absolutely right. So there'll be a lot of interest day 1.
Yeah, what we always say, don't we? Draft for value, not for need, and that this is one of those positions where it very much applies to. Let's go through a recap of the guys we've just spoken about. So Stu, do you want to recap your top 5 for me, please?
Yeah, so at number 5, I had Anton Harrison from Oklahoma. Number 4 was DeJuan Jones. Number 3, Broderick Jones. Number 2, Peter Skoronski. And number 1, Paris Johnson.
Okay, so for me, number 5, Matthew Bergeron. Number 4, Darnell Wright. Number 3, Broderick Jones. Number 2, Paris Johnson. And number 1, Peter Skoronski.
And rounding it out, I had at number 5 Matthew Bergeron as well. Again, I had Darnell Wright at 4. Broderick Jones comes in at 3. And then I had Skoronski going at 2. And number 1 was Paris Johnson Jr. There we are, guys. Those were the top guys that we want to speak about, but I'm sure there were some other guys that we wanted to speak about, and maybe there's some later round guys that we quite like the look of. Anyone you want to talk about here?
Yeah, one for me was a guy who I liked a lot over summer and has not had the best of years and the best of kind of draft process, and that was Jalen Duncan, the Maryland tackle. I think that he has potential to potentially be a swing tackle. Could fill in at other spots. He's a really athletic guy with the right size and length to play the position. He's got quick feet and moves laterally. He's a real menace in the run game. He has got a combination of movement skills and physical dimensions that's really going to excel there. But I don't think he plays with enough strength, and I think he's someone who's given up a lot of sacks. 19 and 43 games is not a great at the college level, where he's only going to be facing against better defenders. But I think as someone who could be a backup offensive lineman and step in when needed and do a job, Jalen Duncan, somebody maybe to look out for at that position.
The only other one that I wanted to mention was Blake Freeland at BYU, because he came in as the most athletic tackle at the combine. Amazing kind of athletic traits. The thing he's got to do is develop his base, develop his strength. He's not a mauler by any stretch of the imagination. And also the level he's been playing at means he hasn't actually been able to prove himself against particularly high quality opposition. But he's got a year at right tackle, he's got a couple of years at left tackle, and I'd be really interested to see how those athletic traits kind of translate to the NFL.
Yeah, and just rounding out a couple of guys that I want to mention. Tyler Steen from Alabama is a guy who's building up some traction at the moment. I think we all thought he would have been a later round guy, but seems to be getting some hype on day two. So he's a player that we'll look out for and see if someone likes to take a chance there. And I really like Carter Warren from Pitt, who is going a little bit underrated, but I like him. Say with these guys, as we said at the top of the show, that you do have to take one early if you wanted an impact starter. So I guess if your team is drafting one on day three, don't hold out a whole lot of hope for a impact day one starter. You might just be getting some depth, but I think Carter Warren is a player who could definitely do that for you. Anyone else?
Yeah, just another one who's kind of going to be a kind of later guy is Azim Richards from North Carolina. He's a guy who I think gets off the snap really quickly, and he's got nice feet, quite a cerebral player, a smooth mover, moving around the ground. He does really well in run game. He's more of a running game guy than a pass blocking specialist. He's got quite good technique. I think he's not someone who's a great powerful guy, and he's someone who can, again, these backup guys are valuable because teams do lose offensive linemen to various injuries, and he's got some traits that I like that might be developed as time goes on.
Yeah, and this just shows, MJ, how we do our own scouting and come together, because I actually have Azim Richards as an interior guy, so I actually evaluated him as a guard.
Yeah, there you go.
I was just going to come in on Carter Warren and say I wish he'd had a full season, because he managed 4 games and then had I haven't got what the injury was, but it was a season-ending injury, and I think it would have been interesting to see how he stacked up if he'd managed, because he was on a progression there where his second year. Last year was again better than his first year, and he was making some strides there. And it's a shame he didn't have a full season this year, but it'd be interesting to see where he goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we have it. That's our offensive tackle preview done. You'll hear a host of those names taken on night one of the NFL draft, and say at one of the most important positions in the NFL. Stu, MJ, thanks for all your scouting knowledge, and thanks to you for joining us. Would you have ranked any of these players differently? Is there anyone maybe that we've missed? Of course, we'd love to hear from you. Head over to YouTube, leave your thoughts in the comment section, or you could also head over to Twitter, which is at 99yards. And remember, if you haven't already, head over to YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It'll really help us out. And if you're listening on the audio version, the link is in the description, so use that. Thanks for joining us. We should have Brian back next week, I believe. You'll be happy to know. I will catch you in a couple of days for our next positional preview. Get ready for the salute, Stu. We'll see you next time for some more draft talk.